Next, a very tall man appeared, dressed in a bright red cape and tall cone-shaped hat, with star-like points coming out of it. The group began uttering a guttural-sounding chant. Then, as if from nowhere, fruits, vegetables, and some kind of nuts were served. The tall, caped man looked around at the circle and seemed to be pleased. This now will be the most magnificent of burial grounds. Around A.D. 1135, Geoffrey, or Joffrey, if you're English, of Monmouth, in his work The History of the Kings of Britain, claimed that Stonehenge was brought from Africa to Ireland by a tribe of giants. From there it was flown by the magician Merlin across the sea to its present site. It seems that Merlin did this for Ambrosius Aurelius, the king of Britons. In his history, Geoffrey states Ambrosius buried about 460 nobles who had been murdered by the Saxons at the site, and goes on to claim that Uther Pendragon, Ambrosius' brother and King Arthur's magical father, and King Constantine were also buried in the vicinity. It's interesting how much King Arthur and Merlin keep winding in and out of the mythology of Stonehenge. I do believe that these two figures existed, but not in the overblown version familiar to us from so many works of fiction. Now we get back to the Druids. By the time they arrived on the scene, they were also smaller arrangements of stone within the larger outer circle. These formations were made of a different kind of rock, called bluestone, which scientists believe came from southwestern Wales. In the 17th century, the Druids, who had been practicing in Britain for more than 1,000 years prior to this, were defamed as devil worshippers, given to human sacrifice and the like. When I stood there in the growing twilight, seeing these visions open up almost like a large kaleidoscope of time, I saw some white-hooded figures making their way across the plain. There seemed to be at least 100 of them walking single file. There were no words spoken, but a very spiritual hush fell over everything. Even the people I was with said they felt it. The atmosphere, the birds, the air, everything became quiet, as if we were piercing the veil of a time long past. It was obvious we were in the presence of the Druid priests. As the Druids approached the circle, it's almost as if I could see how this place was once whole, with all the stones in place, and what I call the altar stone in the middle. Some of the priests stood in the circle, while others stood as sentinels on the outside, and they all began to chant in a melodious tone. One man stepped out. The other thing that distinguished him from the rest was that he had a golden cord around his white robe. He stood with his arms straight up and began to chant very loudly. It was almost like a Greek chorus, or in Catholic ceremonies, when the priest chants and the congregation answers him. I know Latin, and the chant had that flowing timbre to it, but was much more primitive. I saw the man with the golden cord take a beautiful sword out of his robe, which he had now laid on the altar stone. As I watched it, it began to gleam with a golden light. Then another priest appeared and put a figurine of a nude woman with large hips and breasts on the altar next to the sword. Everyone seemed to pay homage to this idol. It's interesting to note here that there was a mother goddess present. Next they joined hands and began to sing again, sounding much like a Gregorian chant. The head male turned and everyone was seated. Another two priests came up with pouches and opened them on the altar. At first I couldn't make out what was in them, and then I saw it was bones. It was as if they were honoring their dead. As they sat and sang, the high priest took out the sword, gestured to one of the stone doorways, and then proceeded to point at the sky. Next he went through the doorway and came back in through the one next to it, still pointing to the sky with the sword. I could see through some of the entrances, and I quickly realized that each one not only pointed to where the sun rose, but they pointed to different galaxies as well, including Andromeda. The priest sat for a long time, and then, as if on cue, Each followed the leader through the doors, while looking up at the heavens. Before I could quietly utter what I was feeling, my spirit guide Francine said, "They're showing their belief that we're reincarnated time and time again, and that we come from other galaxies. The stones are symbols of our entry into this reality." It was as if the Druids were saying, "I will die, but I will go to the heavens and possibly recuperate there, and then come back here, through the doorway of life to learn." I came away feeling that life is a circle. Sometimes we'll find ourselves back at the starting point unless we go through the doorways of life for God and learn our lessons. I must pause here to explain Francine to those of you who are not familiar with her. Francine is my primary spirit guide, and she's been with me since I was born. I also have a secondary guide, Rahim, who came to me later on, but he won't appear in this book. In addition to being a trance medium and clairvoyant, I'm also clairaudient, which means that I hear my spirit guides. I've heard Francine since I was 7 years old, and if you've read any of my other books, then you know that she's a great researcher and has been proven right countless times. As I was leaving, I told my group to look at these round earthen mounds that encircle Stonehenge, for they're like burial chambers. A short time later, the media reported that skeletons had been found by archaeologists in and around Stonehenge. The aspect of buried remains also goes back to the legend that Geoffrey or Joffrey of Monmouth relates of Stonehenge being erected as a memorial. People wanted to be buried as close to this religious and holy site as possible. The more important you were, the closer you were buried. Hence, noblemen and the high leaders were buried closer to the sacred site than those of lesser note. As I've said so many times, don't just take what I say or anyone says for granted. Research the facts and you'll come to the right conclusions. But don't assume that everything we don't know is wrong or evil, or that we already know all the answers. A closed mind lets nothing in, or, for that matter, it lets nothing out. Easter Island. Easter Island has always been considered one of the most mysterious places on this planet. Located in the South Pacific, about 2,000 miles from both Chile and Tahiti, the nearest population centers. The island is not the easiest place to get to. The first European to discover the island was a Dutch captain, Jacob Rajivian, on Easter in 1722. Thus the name of the island. Archaeologists say there's evidence that Polynesians discovered the island around AD 400. And while most scientists agree with this, some say that it's actually first inhabited by people from South America. Explorer Thor Heyerdahl, author of Kon-Tiki, theorized that the first inhabitants were from Peru, due to the similarity of the island's statues called moea to Peruvian stonework. The island's moea range in size from a few tons and under 4 feet tall to almost 72 feet in length and approximately 150 to 165 tons. To date, scientists have counted 887 of these statues on the island, with an average height of 13 feet and an average weight of 13 tons. Only 288 out of the 887 are at their final resting place, with the remainder either in the quarry or strewn about the island in the midst of being transported. Today, the land, people, and language of Easter Island are all referred to Rapa Nui by its inhabitants. The islanders had a written language called Rongorongo, which can't be completely deciphered even today. Only 26 wooden tablets containing this language still exist, and their meaning is yet to be determined. In addition, the island contains many petroglyphs, rock carvings which depict birds and the everyday life of the early inhabitants. They were like a diary almost, made to show succeeding generations how they lived and what they did in their daily life. One of the big mysteries of Easter Island is why the people